Kavasseur and Jimmy Price here. Take a seat next to us around the Tanoa and let's have a shell and talk Kava. Yeah, so the idea of the Kava Lounge came about. Jimmy and I here were just kind of brainstorming one day, and we thought about the fact that there are no Kava podcasts and there are no real kind of entertaining, easy to digest sources of Kava information, of which there is plenty out there. So we came up with the idea of this podcast, the Kava Lounge, to look at the research, anthropological, historical, scientific research about kava and present it in a fun, digestible way that is both informative, and entertaining, and hopefully a good guide for your kava journey. So we're excited to have you here, and we're going to be doing this a couple times a month or so. And yeah, so Jimmy,
Right
what are
on.
your thoughts?
I'm just here to support. Nah, man. This is going to be a podcast about kava and coming to you from two extremely invested kava enthusiasts who truly love the plant and want to know more about it and are just completely on board with anything kava related. So whatever you hear here, you'll definitely see reflected in research, either on platforms or actually in papers, because we're going to be talking about the nitty gritty and also the things that affect us from day to day. So it will be an interesting time to sit and listen about our favorite plant.
So, for the first paper that we're looking at here, it's titled "The Sustainability of the Kava Trade" by Nancy J. Pollock, and she is an anthropologist. This paper was published in the Contemporary Pacific Volume 1, Number 2, in the year 2009 by the University of Hawaii Press. And this was a very interesting paper, in my opinion. Went over the kind of economic impacts of the kava ban in Europe and it's Germany in particular, and then the ban among Australian Aborigines in Australia, in Northern Australia, and talked about some of the differences between kava traditions in different cultures from Vanuatu to Tonga to Hawaii. Yeah, Jimmy, did you enjoy the paper?
Hi, Doug. I did enjoy that paper. It was actually quite good. It was kind of a good recap of all the research that I've read in the past in regards to the liver problems that they've talked
Mm.
about, and goes through all the ways that kava is consumed in different areas. However, it does talk a lot about the pills and concoctions in the United States, which we hope that one day it will be a minority and we'd be more talking about the people drinking powdered kavas
Right.
traditionally, be that micronized, instant, or traditional. I'm still okay with those as long as we don't go over into the extract world just too far without knowing where it's coming from. But I thought this paper was quite good and kind of gives you a look down into how kava came to people and how they interpreted it for their own society and how it was different everywhere it landed. There was a different iteration of kava and in that society. So it kind of took different forms as it landed in different spots. But I thought that let's see there.
Well, Jimmy, just really quick, since you pointed out you used the word pills,
Mhm.
and actually that's one thing I wanted to discuss when I was sitting down with this paper, taking notes and kind of thinking about Nancy Pollock's arguments. One thing that jumped out to me as being a little bit strange was the fact that whenever she would refer to kava as it's consumed in the United States or Europe, she would say kava pills. I don't think she ever mentioned even once, aside from the migrants who moved from the Pacific Islands to New Zealand, to the United States, to Europe. She never once mentioned powdered kava. It was always kava pills, the quality of the kava that was in the kava pills, and how LeBeau had argued that there needed to be a consistent source of the kava lactones. I thought that was kind of strange because by 2009, people were drinking powdered kava. I know I
They
was. I
were.
was in graduate school,
Yep.
so
It
I
was
thought that.
out there, but it
Mhm.
was still very obscure. It was still
Mhm.
not very well known. 2008, it was still talk to anyone on the street and they'd be like, "What, coffee?" And it
Right,
nothing.
right.
It still would have no true understanding back then. So I get that. We didn't really have much of a presence then either. There wasn't too much of an online thing. Blue Light, Irwood, couple of Peace Corps members,
Right.
and that's about it for Kava. So I why it would appear that way to a researcher. I guess if this person went back in 2018 and wrote this paper, it wouldn't look the same. It would look a bit different from this. But yeah, it's that is interesting. that
I
she
feel like maybe she didn't see the Kava King in the in the
yeah.
because I remember Kava King. I was actually my first foray into Kava was in 2002 with Kava King with Instant Kava. I never actually like I'm one of those few blessed people that never had to deal with the Kava pills, and thank God because they really don't do anything.
I've taken 'em I read somewhere on some web forum, they're like, "Well, you can make a drink if you take the pills and break them open and put them in water." And I had this yellow powder that I was trying to mix with water that absolutely would not mix with water, and I was just like, what?" I don't know how it continued to, like that how I, like, went on drinking kava with some of the things that I went through to just try to figure it out, and, like, I ate it off tortilla chips, extract. It was like I drank kava one time that I'm not even sure was actually kava. It was more like spent coffee grounds. The things we went through to get where we are now with the quality of kavas that we can enjoy. We've come a long way since, especially since the writing of this
Absolutely.
paper, Nancy Pollock, and we've certainly gone light years ahead now. We have frozen kavas that are fresh from Hawaii. We have Vanuatu kavas that you could basically still feel the heat from the Vanuatu sun when you get the package. They're so fresh. So it is such a different thing than it used to be. And it's becoming more open too. And that's something that this paper kind of doesn't see. And it is slowly opening up and more people are getting involved and like the
Yeah.
exporters are wanting to be known and that's a good thing. But
Yeah, well, and I think in addition to that, it's a really good point you bring up. The the consumer demand for quality kava has greatly increased. I think due to in large part our I don't want to give ourselves too much credit, but I think we should give credit where credit's due.
yep.
Starting these different the Kava forums, starting the Kava Lounge on Facebook, the different people who've done YouTube reviews, I guess including myself. Like there's been an increased demand for single cultivars, for better quality kava that's clean and doesn't make you sick. So I think that the vendors are responding to that, and that the pills and the Kava King and the kind of earlier things that were for sale. Just nowadays, we would just kind of stick our noses up at those things if
Right.
somebody put them in front of us.
Yogi tea.
Yogi tea, yeah. Even though I do like that tea, I don't
Yeah, yeah.
necessarily like it for the kava. Yeah,
Right, exactly. It's good, it's good. People like it for the flavor and everything, and but, yeah, it's not for the Kava. Uh,
yeah.
let's see here. Let's go on to
Well, let me jump in
go
if
ahead, yeah, Robert.
is one of the first things that I and this is a little bit academic, but one of the things that jumped out to me was on the first in the intro section, the first page, she makes the argument that sustainability of the kava trade is at risk. This is a quote. According to the World Commission on Environment and Development, sustainability refers to the development needs of current generations that must be met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I find that like definition of sustainability to be a little bit irrelevant to the content of the paper. Like I don't really see how in Vanuatu or Fiji or Tonga for that matter or Hawaii for that matter, like how the sustainability of kava production is really
I
at risk.
think I think it's more I think it's more genetic information being lost due to overseas and export specificity. She talks a little later on about that, but what it kind of says to me is that she's trying to say don't these specific things are being honed in on, which is kind of you're losing the vision of the other parts of it. I think that's kind of where it's going from. It's not really well worded in terms of how it's what context that's in and where it's directed to, but I believe that's talking about the conservation of genetic information in
Mhm.
DNA, I believe.
Yeah, and she does definitely when she discusses the different geographic contexts, discuss the different numbers of cultivars
Mhm.
and the fact that if kava is commercialized to a very high level, there could be
Huge base.
demands market that cause kava to be, you know,
Eradicated.
yeah. Well, or just kind of like standardized to the point where when you buy kava, you're basically only going to get Borogu. I think she actually refers to
Yep.
Borogu as being one of the kavas that it was in high demand by the pharmaceutical companies and
Yep, that's exactly right, and I mean, after they figured out what was right, because this is 2008 um, understanding, and before that, they were just like, "Give us the strongest you can find," and I think it touches on the 2-day, and she even talks about how Fiji was trying to ban the import of Vanuatu kava
Right,
because it
right.
was too strong because it was 2-day, and so it's interesting the whole dynamic there.
Another thing at the very end of that intro, she talks about three fronts that she's gonna, in the paper, examine kava on. The first being the customary trade of kava, which is in reference to the Pacific region. The second is the export of kava for customary usage by migrants. So that's a lot of people moving to New Zealand, I think is a really, and New Caledonia are
Mhm.
really prescient examples of that, where you have a lot of people from Vanuatu and Fiji that move there and import kava. And then the third front is exports for pharma. But within those three fronts, I don't really see us. Like
Yeah,
I don't see the American, the Kavasseur, the Jimmy Price,
it's not in there.
the Kava Lounge. Yeah, I don't see that reflected in, any 3 of those fronts. So
I
that
don't
I
think we
find that
were
to be
even a thing.
fascinating. Yeah,
So
that's
it's
true. Good
and
point.
so we weren't around, and then that I don't think that reflected, and there wasn't this overarching curiosity towards this information regarding Kava. So you kind of sparked off that different category that could have been added to that paper had they written this in 2018, 2019.
That's
But
true.
it's yeah, I definitely think that she would go back and add that. I think that that would be a very, very important part of the entire picture of Kava. Because I mean, there's tons of people that drink Kava at home. Then not at the Kava bar, but just at home. And they don't I mean, we have
Yeah.
so many lurkers that never sign up for an account, and these people drink Kava, and they do it at their sink, or they do it or their alu ball, wherever they happen to have to be. But,
Yeah.
it's changed, and there are a bunch of people that do use it for some pretty specific medicinal qualities. We have you and I have history with a person who's blind who uses it for the socket pain that he has, and then it's just so many unique use cases for it that I believe that would be included in this paper too. And it's just they don't know about it, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely, and to those people at home, and people listening to this who drink kava by themselves, when you look at some of these papers, you read about how kava is traditionally consumed in groups and circles, sometimes in very highly ritualized contexts in
Yes.
traditional Tonga and Fiji and Vanuatu. But there's nothing wrong with drinking kava alone. And I've been doing it for 20 years,
See.
and it's helped me out a lot. And it's an evolving thing. So there's no right or wrong way to drink kava unless you're mixing it with chemicals and
Right.
it's I wanted in a background section, which is kind of the introduction to the different cultural analysis in the Pacific. She says something that's really kind of stood out to me as being a really cool point, and this is a quote: "The close association between kava consumption and rituals honoring the ancestral gods is maintained in Vanuatu, Fiji, and several Polynesian societies, while more recent secular use represents a democratization of kava with its usage in kava bars in Vanuatu, Tonga, and Pohnpei." What I thought was interesting about that is it shows that even in these countries that are the heartland of kava, or where kava come from, kava went from being something that was very, very ritualistic and sacred, and kind of only existing for that purpose, to being something that's more social and more secular, that you can drink with your friends and drink with your buddies, drink at home with your family or whatever. And I don't think that was always the case. So it's important for us to always remember that these islands haven't been frozen in time, and kava ceremonies have only occurred one way. They continue to evolve in
Always.
Vanuatu, in Fiji.
Mm.
There's no right or wrong way to drink kava in those cultures either. And women are increasingly becoming more accepted as participants in kava ceremonies in different countries. So the culture changes over time, and it something that used to be only used for religious purposes can now be used for secular purposes. And that's true with a lot of, not to make a comparison, but with hallucinogenics, psilocybin and mescaline and peyote and things like that, the indigenous people use them for purely for kind of religious purposes. but we're finding all of these medicinal benefits for PTSD, trauma, things like that in modern society. So I think we can look at kava as the same way as being something that means different things to different people at different times.
Has socio-political, ceremonial, and personal utmost importance to those who find it necessary, like just to the people that find it good in their life, that have a good fit for kava in their life. And that's the one thing I always have to go back on every now and then is like drinking kava isn't for every person. Not
Mhm.
everybody's gonna like it. And it's a unique thing. It takes dedication. It tastes like strawberry milkshake. And it's not it's something that takes a while to understand and get a good understanding of what you're actually jumping into. But I like that democratization of kava. Um, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it absolutely has done that. Vanuatu is a key example. They've gone from only drinking it ceremonial and through the religious practices to it being a huge government pushed for alcohol consumption curtailing.
Yeah.
And so it's and that's like the biggest secular use of it that you could think of. So it's gone from highly highly ceremonial, highly religious to a tool for the government. And also it's just it like we were saying earlier, it just takes the form of wherever it lands and where it needs to be. And I think that's what makes it so much of a utilitarian thing for people sometimes is that it just does what they need it to and not more. And it just has that unique feeling to it. I don't know. It's difficult to
Yeah.
describe. But yeah, I like the democratization of kava, and just it's funny. Just below that, it talks about how kava is regarded as a pleasurable social drink, and individuals rarely drink it alone. And so that I find that sentiment like reflected through all the research, especially the old anthropological research in kava. It's like no one drinks this alone. In fact, they would might even brand you a witch for drinking it alone. Like they'll give you the side eye,
Yeah.
like what are you doing? You know, this is wrong. So it's strange because we are, I guess we're the Kava witches, drinking at our sinks and yelling at our backsplashes about how good it tastes. But yeah, it is interesting how that kind of has been a unsaid rule, but I guess a stated rule because we just recently witnessed one of our friends who also happens to be a Vanuatu exporter brought on his friend to one of our Zooms, his farmer friend, and
Mhm.
let's see, he was talking about he said, "Hey," he was making his kava, and the guy comes in, he goes, "Hey, you make who's here? Who you drinking kava with?" Like, trying to trying to see why he'd be drinking kava alone, but he was on our chat, so he was drinking kava with us. Like, "Oh, okay, okay." But it does seem to be something that's always wound through the literature and the sentiments and the attitudes of the kava drinkers is don't drink it alone. But it doesn't always happen for us. Like, I only know one person within like a 200-mile radius that drinks kava. So it's not something where I can just call up the boys and we pull out the bucket and mix them up and go to town. It's just not doesn't happen that way. And that's all right. Like that's I think people need to hear that it's okay because there's a lot of attitudes out there that might say you have to do it one way or the other. But having gone what we've gone through with kava, I think we can both say that use it how you want to and it will let you know what's right. It will give you hints as to what you need to do. Like when your skin starts flaking off, you need to back down or find a different
Yeah.
cover or like learn what you're doing wrong or reach or change your strainer or whatever you need to do. It's a learning process. And I think that the more we direct people with it, except for I kind of have a specific area where I guess we could talk about, but the cultural appropriation aspect of some of
Ooh.
the ceremonial creations, I guess we could say. But
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, let's leave that for another
that might
article.
be best for another topic.
Yeah, he doesn't really touch on that in this,
No,
and
no.
that is such a whole, like, different
That's another box of worms.
ball of wax. Yeah, exactly. But on that topic, I just wanted to mention, because this came up about drinking alone versus drinking in groups. I met with one of my old professors from graduate school where I studied applied anthropology, and I actually brought up this topic, and I was talking about that that call that you just referenced, where we were talking to those Vanuatu farmers, and that anecdote about, who are you drinking kava with? That's
Mm.
not, what's interesting about that, and I think it's actually like a really simple answer to why that is. And it's not because there's some like really, really intense moral belief that one must not drink kava alone. I think when I talked to my professor, we kind of brainstormed this idea. American culture and European culture, we've like broken down we're highly hyper individualistic, and we've broken down the barriers even within the family. So where you just have like the nuclear family, and this is getting like very anthropological, but
That's good.
to the point where it's like you have a father, a mother, kids. In a lot of traditional societies, in places like Melanesia, Polynesia, you have these huge families that live together, like grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, might have like 25 people like living within the same area. And so you're just not alone to begin with. So like
Right.
in the United States, you might, you move out of your parents' house, you get a job, you get an apartment, you might have a wife and kids. That's becoming increasingly less common. There's more and more likelihood that you're going to be doing things alone
Yeah.
in our culture than in a place like Vanuatu. So I don't read that much into that, and I don't worry too much when I drink kava alone that I'm somehow like
Summoning the devil.
breaking some sacred pact with the original kava drinkers. I think it's fine, and I'm sure that in Vanuatu and Fiji, people sometimes drink kava alone. I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
imagine people don't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's pretty common anyways. It's just those people that think it should be consumed in one specific way, and it will be consumed how it will be consumed. We can guide, and I think we should guide. And there are some good ways to drink kava. There are some really therapeutic ways of drinking kava. There's some like questionable ways of drinking kava that make you go, "Are you all right? Like, do you need to go to treatment?" Like that sort of way of drinking kava, but it's all individual. It's all comes down to what you feel comfortable with and what you find that works for you. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah,
I have no authority to make that statement in any way
right.
official. But yeah, in my opinion,
Nor does anybody,
exactly.
right?
No one does. So I'm backing up the here. So
There's no, like there's no pope of kava. It's like
right.
a like, there are so many different countries that
Mm,
drink kava traditionally, and they have their own traditions
yep.
that you can't really say that, "Oh, the Hawaiians are the experts," or the
Right.
Fijians are the experts, or the Samoans are the experts. So it's yeah, I think it's always good to keep an open mind
It,
and realize that
honestly, just knowing how kavas is propagated, they're all experts for being able to continue to grow it and keep it around and keep care for it, and it really does go to show how important kava was or is, and still it still is, but
mm,
definitely was to the people that brought it across the South Pacific with them, Lapita. But it just goes to show just how much emphasis was placed on this plant and its survival and its continuance. And it also shows how strong religion is to just wipe it off, to just completely
right.
go in there and just torch so much of what was going on with Kava. But that actually, I believe that there was missionaries talked about it in here.
Yeah, it does come up. Yeah, it comes up later in the article.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
in the Vanuatu section, one thing that I thought was super interesting that, and I think this kind of references what we were talking about earlier with what was happening with Kava at the time with the German scare and Australian Aborigines. It's on page 271 under the Vanuatu diversity of Kava in the Pacific. There's a quote that says LeBeau has suggested that several steps are necessary to ensure the sustainability of Vanuatu export sales to international markets. These include reducing variability between cultivars and cultivation sites, using only root material to produce a standardized product, and establishing quality controls. Now, the second two things there seem perfectly reasonable to me, but the first point, that reducing variability between cultivars and cultivation sites, I find that no longer, like, really applies, 'cause I
yep,
feel like nowadays, like, people wanna try the different cultivars. People
yes,
go to different kavas for different effects. I
yes.
can see, like, when you're putting in a pill, like, how it might be different.
Yeah, I believe that was for specifically international market. So I think that would be in the context of her pills and kava concoctions sort of thing.
Right,
So
right.
and even then, like I guess he would be speaking. He already says,
Yeah, so that there
yeah,
would be
that's
like, consistent strength and, like, kind of a more consistent strength and effect, I think, of the kava. Like, so if you were to go buy a bottle of kava pills,
to be the same.
it would be the same every time. Kind of like when you go to McDonald's, you always get the
Yep.
same. crappy little
The
like,
same disappointment everywhere, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
So I think that's kind of what, but like as I said, I think that nowadays in the present, like we don't.
that
That's
doesn't
no
apply.
longer what we look for. We actually want there to be like more variety. We want there to be more diversity.
That does not I think that might still apply to the export for extract market maybe, but, in terms of powdered what she doesn't address here, and she doesn't address our community and our way of drinking kava and our little thing, but it doesn't take that into account, but I can see how you would want to keep a very consistent export for your pharmaceuticals because they were pharmaceuticals for a while. It was an actual pharmaceutical drug you could go down and buy at the pharmacy in Germany
Right.
and Switzerland, and so it was a big deal. It fell a long way, and it's quite unfortunate.
One cool thing that this article does really well is the way that she lays out the different descriptions for the different geographic regions. I
Mm,
found it to be really well done because she kind of loosely references PNG at some point, but she jumps into Vanuatu and the homeland of Kava, where you have the most cultivars, the most kind of evidence of domestication, which is consistent with agricultural crops all over the world. So that makes a lot of sense. But then she moves into Fiji and talks about Fiji, and there's a lot of cool stuff in there, including about the kind of the more recent involvement of women in kava drinking social ceremonies. But then what's really cool is when she gets to Tonga and Pei
mhm.
and yeah, New Caledonia. And I've never thought about it this way, but Tonga was the gateway for kava into Polynesia.
Yes.
And I guess like I had kind of loosely understood that in the past, but the way that it's presented here, it actually really kind of opened my mind to this. What if it must have been a really big historical event because you have these Melanesian practices with kava and traditions, and then it gets to Tonga, and it becomes like really connected to like the kings and the different political ceremonies and the power of kava that is used to differentiate people's different political statuses and economic statuses within different societies.
Mhm.
Um, and it made me think of your trip to Hawaii, where you observed a kava ceremony, and it's described in here as this kind of U-shaped or like horseshoe-shaped
Mhm.
group of people with like a chief or like some kind of like really noble person that is presiding over the kava bowl and the is kind of the master of ceremonies.
Mhm.
And I just thought it was cool that that was that unfolded in the Polynesian phase of kava history and didn't really exist prior to that. It was like more ritualistic and kind of religious when it was in Melanesia, but then when it got to Polynesia, it became this like really powerful political tool.
Political and social stratifying
Yeah.
tool. Yes. Mhm. It was a huge display of power, and that's another paper that Nancy Pollock writes. It's called "The Power of Kava," and it is actually very much, centered on that concept of how Kava delineated the social ranks among the Tongans and the other people that I think several different places use it that way, but Tongan Fiji, mainly Tonga, would be very much reliant on that system to delineate social rank and political rank because there were two different things. You could be the top head political person, but you could have a low social rank. So it's really strange how the dichotomy works. But the researchers would say it makes sense to the people that live there. It all makes perfect sense. Even though it's extremely complicated and intricate and complex, it's still something they can comprehend on a whole. And when you get into the Kava ceremony, kind of just it solidifies all of that into you can view the hierarchy of the ceremony and who's who, where they're sitting, delineates their social rank.
There's a really good quote about that, and it's on page 276, and this is a little bit of a long quote, so pardon me. She says, "The kava circle, as it is often labeled, is in fact a U-shaped formation in which all participants have their place at one side or the other of the highest ranking participant. He sits at the head of the U, facing the open space where the kava bowl and the kava maker, usually female, are located. The kava maker, and this is for Tonga, the kava maker is assisted by a number of young men and women, as well as the master of ceremonies. After the kava root is pounded and water added, the liquid is sieved to remove fibrous material before being served in a half coconut shell." I mean, this is all we're all familiar with that. It is crucial that the kava is presented in the correct order to honor the status of everyone seated in the kava circle. Women sit outside the formal circle, observing closely to ensure that protocol is carefully followed. I found that to be interesting. I did not know that. Like
Me
that's
too.
like a huge
Mhm.
that's like biggest kind of new fact of the day for me is that like women in Tonga sit outside of this kava circle and basically like enforce the
The
protocols.
rules. Yep.
That blows my mind. Yeah.
I had that highlighted in my paper.
Yeah, because the way that people have talked about women in kava has been this kind of patriarchy kind of thing where it's like
Yes.
women were not allowed to participate in anything to do with kava. But this is actually like, according to this, like they actually have a really powerful role in
Mhm.
ensuring that the protocols are followed. And to me, that denotes kind of more respect than it does kind of power over women.
Okay, we're gonna go start back talking about the Nancy Pollock's paper, the Contemporary Pacific Sustainability of the Kava Trade,
Yeah, this is that's the one.
and we're gonna go back and Dr. Pollock breaks down all the countries by individuals and breaks down the cultures and different individual facts about each one. And she starts in the South Pacific with Vanuatu, which was, I believe, we mentioned earlier, the homeland of Kava. Northern Vanuatu was where Kava was domesticated from Piper wishmanii to its domesticated form, Piper methisticum. And due to its varieties there, due to its length of time there, and just number of people that were involved with cultivation of Kava there, they managed to create 247 different cultivars of kava in Vanuatu, which is impressive because that's not a lot of land and that's a lot of different cultivars to have come up with in the amount of time that they have. So and they also are known for having the strongest kava. The tests can confirm that that's a pretty accurate statement in terms of kava lactone percentage, and it's just it they are typically higher than most others, but not all other. But yeah, and I mean and they also process their kava from fresh and not dried kava, and that's going to be one that is pretty important to underscore in terms of kava's physiological effects, because it seems that dry kava has not nearly as much effect as freshly made kava from fresh roots.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree, and I think in my experience, the difference between dried kava and fresh kava, and I've unfortunately only had fresh kava from frozen root, but I think it's pretty close to being the same thing. In my experience, yeah, the effects are kind of markedly different. But I would love to hear your thoughts, Jimmy. I mean, I know that you've imbibed in the green juice before, so what did you notice is kind of the major big difference between dried kava and fresh kava?
I think the biggest difference is going to be the taste in terms of I mean, it tastes like cucumber water, like anesthetic cucumber water. And most of the fresh kavas that I've had have all been Hawaiian kavas. So they've all been I mean, not, they didn't melt your face off. They didn't put you on your
Right.
ass, and they didn't cause you to chatter your teeth or anything. It was a very mellow, very relaxing sort of experience. Yeah. I mean, fresh kava, I mean, in terms of it's flavor, and it has a different feel to it. I don't think either of us have had real fresh kava in
Yeah.
terms of being
No.
at the plant where they grind it up right there, pull out of the ground, wash it, skin it, and then process it right there and drink it. So I think that is the real kava, is the real fresh kava.
So
But
so one thing I wanted to point out here that really jumped out to me being a farmer myself is that 247 cultivars number. That is really impressive from an agricultural standpoint, and having grown cacao and some other different crops in West Africa. For a small island nation like Vanuatu to cultivate 247 different cultivars of kava, it means that they were really putting in the work. Like they, you don't just that doesn't just happen spontaneously. With a plant like kava, you don't have flowers, you don't have seeds. I mean, you do, but you can't use them to propagate the plant. So farmers, kava farmers, would have literally had to notice a difference in a kava plant, be attracted to that difference, and then consciously choose to propagate one single plant into a new cultivar, and then just kind of like wait for those mutations to happen. It was the fact that they were cultivated 247 varieties is impressive. And after Kava moves out of Vanuatu, you don't see that happening that much. And that's one of the scientific pieces of evidence that let scholars know that Kava originated in Vanuatu is the genetic diversity that's seen in the varieties there. So super interesting fact.
Hmm. Yes. And I mean, it can be as something as small as a slight change in the number of dots between the internodes. And it could indicate a chemotype change to the kava that might make it more desirable or less desirable. Because I'm sure out of these 247 cultivars, there were probably a bunch of those cultivars that they were like, "Whoa, this is crap. Bury that
Oh,
stuff." Like so, I mean, there's probably a lot more that didn't make the grade than did. So that's only representative of just a tiny bit of work. And I mean that you're a farmer, but it's incredible that they would have that amount of dedication and focus on one plant. And it's just shows how important and how far back it was. I mean, they date that somewhere 2000 to 2500 years ago. It was that important then for them to do this, that this was already ingrained in their society when they started. Like kava just was, I don't know how or what the chemicals or how they made kava originally. What was the first kava that was made? Was it Piper Witch Manii? And what about that caused them to want to cultivate it? Like what like I don't know. I just there's a lot of questions that are still there, but we could go through those all day. But
yes.
Nancy also talks about that they use less water traditionally than most other islands do when they make their kava. So it's a stronger mix traditionally, just as whatever they mix. Because I mean, I've seen the YouTube videos of tourists going to Vanuatu, and those shells do not look weak at all. They look menacing. Yeah, you could paint with them.
Yeah, in fact, I've read a lot of accounts, contemporary and kind of more historical, where people go to Vanuatu and they try kava for the first time and just get completely, kind of completely lose their legs
Mhm.
because it's so strong. So yeah, I mean, the fact that when they say that add less water, there's definitely a strength that comes out of that. One really interesting part of this paper and other research that we've done in the past, looking at the historical period, and by historical period, I mean the post-contact period where there were colonists and missionaries, is that for a long spell in history, and Nancy talks about this, Kava was abandoned mostly in the kind of the main kind of colonized parts of Vanuatu by missionaries because it was considered heathen. It was considered what's the word for it? Like pagan, like a paganistic kind of ritual
Mhm.
that was associated with funerals and death and all kinds of dark things. And some of those myths are pretty dark. And Kava was consumed at funerals.
Yep.
But unfortunately, what happened as a result was you had these British folks, Spanish folks, I think some French were there too, and they brought all kinds of vices, alcoholism, just different social
Religion.
ill.
Just kidding.
So yeah, religion, yeah, yeah, fundamentalist religion, and also I would imagine the kind of the capitalist
Oh, yes.
mercantilist kind of approach to extracting resources from the earth, whether it's through agriculture. There was definitely forced labor and slavery and things like that. But the kind of the brighter side of that story is that later on, after Vanuatu gained independence, the government made a conscious effort to promote kava because of the really negative social impacts of alcohol that we're all very familiar with in our cultures, our
A lot of
European
a lot
ways.
of churches changed course as well. They
Yeah.
saw how devastating the effects of alcohol were on the people, and that you're not going to have any followers if they're all drunk in the street. So they opened up kava, and even some churches like had kava sessions in the church. Whereas in some places you don't bring kava in the church. Like that's just that is completely taboo.
Right.
But yep, there was I believe it
Yeah.
was the Catholic Church that opened up and allowed a lot of kava drinking in some areas. I'm not sure that's ubiquitous all over the South Pacific, but and then after, I mean, like she was talking about the abandoned kava and how it resurged, and about in 1980, of course, that corresponds with the New Hebrides gaining their independence and becoming Vanuatu, the Republic of Vanuatu, and at this time also a big portion of a push during this time was custom was this this return to the way things were, and Kava was included with that and pushed very heavily. And so in 1980, Kava just came back like a freight train. The Vanuatu Tourism Board promoted Kava as something to appeal to visitors and tourists. And I mean, it was fully embraced as part of their identity at that point. And that's when we start to see it really turn around and become more secularly just
Mhm.
used, I guess you could say. But I thought that was rather interesting how it would all of a sudden when the country gets their independence, they just are like, oh, we can make our own decisions now. Get out.
And Jimmy, the linguistics of the word kava, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the local Melanesian languages, in Vanuatu, it means bitter, right? It
Bitter.
means something like bitter or
Yes,
pepper.
pretty much
Some
bitter. Bitter is the term that kava is interchangeable for, I believe, from what I read in these research papers. Yep, bitter.
So then kava goes from Vanuatu to Fiji next in its kind of geographic dispersal. And in Fiji, it's called Yakona. If I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, but
Yangona.
might be yeah, yeah. And
Yangona.
that's also a word for bitter in the Fijian language. And Fiji is interesting to me because the contemporary kava scene in Fiji, well, maybe scene is not the right word, but the varieties of kava in Fiji are very limited. And it seems like there really isn't a huge emphasis on cultivars. Like
There's not.
you talk about the corm or the stump, or you talk about the lateral roots. The corm being the lawena, and the lateral roots being the waka, and the waka is the stuff that most people go after because it's a stronger.
Don't forget about the casa.
Oh, the casa, can't forget the casa. That's the creepy stuff, right? That's
Yeah,
like
yeah. I mean, honestly, yeah, that's added. That's the basal stem, and it will be if you see pictures on the internet of drying kava, it will be the pieces that look like donuts. They have like holes in the center of them. That's the casa, and that's stem chips, and they have a very very low kava lactone content, so the least for the Fijians, but they
Mhm.
divide them up in 3 grades, and there is no, if there's very little to no of any mind paid to the cultivars. It's just there is a little if you go deep and you get people that know what they're talking about, you can find people that know black and white kava, and you can that's where you'll find better quality and lower quality kava because the black kavas are typically the ones that are stronger and not necessarily in a good way, and the white kavas are more desirable. And it's just I'm not sure if it's something to do with the color of the pith or the parenchyma of the kava plant itself, or maybe the stem, probably the stem color most likely. But also one cultivar that it gets mentioned more than anything because I think it's the only cultivar people know of other than the ones that come with kava carries. But the Damu has
Oh,
always
right.
been requested, and it occupies a very unique spot in the kava cultivars of Fiji. It looks more like a Vanuatu kava than it does a Fiji kava, and it's an interesting one because it's got I believe it's a 423. It's got a lower methysticin level than your average Fijian kava, so it's you have to wonder if it was introduced later, but this is for a whole nother conversation.
Mhm.
But it was introduced actually, it seems to had taken quite a long time to get to Fiji. It actually went to they think it went to Tonga first and then came to Fiji
Hmm.
through Tonga. And they think that Fiji didn't get kava until somewhere around the 15th or 16th century by way of Wallace and through Tonga. And so it's not necessarily as old as it is in Vanuatu, but it's also it's much more ritualistic. The way that kava ceremonies are upheld in Fiji are much more ceremonial than what we see from Vanuatu in terms of their kava rituals. So it is interesting to see the comparison and the contrast there from the two. But let's see here.
Yeah, I think I would just really quickly on that topic of ritual. I think it's important to distinguish. There are different kinds of ritualistic drinking of kava. So in Vanuatu, my understanding from the ethnography and anthropology is kava is consumed in a ritualistic sense that's kind of more like religious and like traditional animistic, kind of connected to like very old
Gods.
traditional belief systems and gods. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good word to use. And Fiji, it's ritualistic in a way of maintaining social order and social hierarchy. And ritual can be applied to, this is the anthropologist in me coming out. The word ritual can be applied to both of those scenarios, but they're two very, very different things. Like, so using a substance for religious ritualistic purposes is a way of like communing with the ancestors and having visions and getting messages from the gods and things like that. Using kava in a kind of socio-political context, or a substance in a socio-political context, is a way of establishing a hierarchy, showing who has power, who doesn't have power. I think it's really important to make that distinction, because when we talk about ritual uses of kava in Vanuatu and ritual uses of kava in Fiji, we're talking about two very different things.
Definitely. And I think it reflects on its origin with Kava having come over from Tonga to Fiji. You see that, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. You'll see that ceremonial aspect reflected in that transfer from one landmass to the other. And with that segue, we'll go into the Tongan topic, and this is considered the Polynesian homeland of Kava. And of course, you'll find everyone that wants to fight you over the myths and of the origins of Kava, but they have their own specific beliefs. And generally, most of the origins of Kava myths arise from the death of either a loved one or a sacrifice, and a touching of the divine, and then a product of that touching of the divine from that sacrifice. And then Kava comes from that. And it's a common theme echoed throughout different cultures, but it's always something to do with someone being killed and then buried, and then kava grew, or plants grew from their grave, usually different spots. The details can be a bit different either way, but it is always something to do with someone being killed and then risen again in the form of kava. There are a couple of different ones where they get kind of macabre. One of them was where a leader comes and comes to an island that's under a famine, and the people there bake their own daughter, their leprous daughter, and
Whoa.
try to serve it to him. And he says, no, take your daughter's body and bury them, and bury the head here and the body here. And sugarcane grew from one where kava grew from the other, and you ate the kava to, or you drank the kava to go down, and you eat the sugarcane to come back to life, so to speak.
Huh.
But they do kind of maintain the same sort of myths in terms of kava's origin. The male beverage, it wasn't to be consumed by the woman, and that's traditionally the ritual was a male thing. However, in terms of medicinal usages, the women did get to use kava medicinally. So, but in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah, I thought
ritual,
that was interesting. I thought that was an interesting fact. They talked about how women, yeah, use kava for like, I think it's like for like urinary tract kind of
yep.
issues, and like to promote like the flow of urine. And I
Mhm.
think we all we've all had our experience. Well, you drink like maybe 1 pint of kava before you go to bed, but I usually drink a couple gallons of kava starting at about 7 p.m. So I'm usually up a couple times at night, and yes, the urine is flowing.
It flows well.
More than I wanted to. But yeah, so I think the Pompeii stuff, like it's a little thin. The section on Pompeii.
Mhm.
But we're familiar with these two cultivars. I've had the Ramadel and the Romwinger, like probably not pronouncing those
Mhm.
correctly, but they are pretty strong. Those Pompeii kavas, like and very unique. I don't know what like I would relate it to, or what I would compare it to in Vanuatu, but I've always felt the kind of zip in those that I didn't feel from the Vanuatu varieties. What about you? Have you had them?
I don't think I've ever had any Pompeii
Oh,
kava. If I did, I'd have to make sakau out of it. And to
yeah.
define what sakau is the term for kava in Pompeii, and it's made differently. It's made with hibiscus mucilage instead of water, or very very little water, and it makes a thick, gelatinous, soupy kava that you sip and you share cups of. You don't share entire bowls of, and it is extremely strong. In fact, there was a recent news article on an Australian MP that went to Pompeii and had drank the entire bowl to himself and ended up in the hospital. but he was fine. He
Oh,
was fine.
no.
He just couldn't walk and threw up a lot. And yeah, he said he slept longer than he had since he was a teenager.
It's a nice side effect.
Yeah. But there's not very many. I mean, Pompeii they have two cultivars and that's it. And they sell at the Kava bars. She did remark that they sold bottled Sakau, but it was not for the tourist. It was not for tourist stomach. It was for local stomach only. Is what it said on the bottle.
Yeah,
So
I'm very familiar with that kind of thinking. The A lot of people who show up in like I've worked in different countries in Africa, and a lot of people who show up for the first time and they drink a locally made product. It's usually not very easy on their stomachs, but over time, like you kind of build up the flora in your stomach to be able to digest local drinks. So I think if you live there long enough, Jimmy, you'd probably be
you
okay.
could.
But if you ever find yourself in Pompeii in your Kava journeys, yeah, I would definitely not recommend drinking the stuff that's
It might
known
be
to
better now. This was from what 2008, 2009. So yeah, it could have been better
it's
now.
still
They might be using Dasani bottled water at this point. Nestle.
so so for so for New Caledonia, I found this part to be interesting because I hadn't really done a lot of research. I mean, I know that you've talked to some folks who've been down to New Caledonia and traveled around there, but this in earlier in the podcast we were talking about the three different kind of areas of study that Dr. Pollock was looking at, and one of them was the migrant communities that consume kava in the diaspora. The diaspora being the community of islanders that lives outside of the islands. And New Caledonia is considered part of that diaspora because Melanesians and Polynesians didn't live in New Caledonia until recently. So New Caledonia has become a huge consumer of kava, but they can't grow kava there.
Harsh
But they have,
atoll.
yeah, yep, exactly. So it's a huge epicenter of kava consumption though. And actually, while we're talking about New Caledonia, we might as well just talk about Kiribati and Australia as well, because neither of those countries either traditionally consumed kava. And Australia, well, Jimmy, why don't you talk about Kiribati first?
Kiribati. That is a very interesting topic. I looked a bit deeper into this one specific area through the sources in the paper. And their manner of consuming kava is more relaxed. They don't have a strict governing rule set. There's no set. It's more Vanuatu style than it is any other country style drinking kava. Kava was introduced by missionaries and state representatives to the mainstream Kiribati. However, it's been being consumed decades prior in the island of Banaba. I said how I know I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but there's one island in Kiribati where there's been several people that have seen people drinking kava there decades before this. It just never caught on locally on the large island, Numea, the cities. But they likely had gotten kava from visiting Fiji and brought it back over, and they were being consumed in the villages. But the Catholic Church, here's where the Catholic Church comes in. They offered space for kava gatherings, and missionaries supported the activity as an alternative to alcohol consumption. So this came along so recently. We're talking about 2003, 2004 is when they're dating this arrival of kava into the mainstream, which is kind of interesting because that's exactly when I could say that's when it hit the American mainstream psyche as well. It's interesting to see the differences in how we've reacted to them. I wonder how many liver. Oh wait, no, I do know how many liver scares they've had. One, and they've had one case of liver issue in New Caledonia, and the people were alcoholics and they were taking a bunch of different medicines as well. And it was traditional kava. It was aqueous prepared traditionally kava. And researchers love to quote that. They love to say, well, actually, it's not just the extracts. And they'll quote that one paper for those people that were just alcoholics, and it was not the kava, obviously. But that's the origin of someone saying that, well, even aqueous extracts cause liver problems. It's the only time it's ever been recorded, and it hangs on a very, very thin thread there. But the Catholic Church supported the activity. I mean, it was seen that this was a better alternative to the alcohol that was being consumed at the time, and it really has picked up. Kiribati and New Caledonia, I believe, and from what I saw from Vanuatu, they actually import more kava than America. than the United States. And in terms of landmass, that's
Wow.
hilarious. So that means
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have I think what I saw was there was a kava bar for every 200 people in Kiribati.
Like, sounds like I need to move to here, boss, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
kava mecca.
so the Australia topic to me is so interesting and tragic. If people know anything about Australia, one of the first things they know is that Australia, prior to the colonization by the British, was the ancestral home of the Australian Aborigines, which were hundreds and hundreds of different ethnic groups and languages and cultures. And during the colonial period, the Australian Aborigines were just brutally treated. There were definite attempts at full genocide and ethnocide, and these communities were forced onto kind of basically reservations within Australia. And alcohol became a huge problem, remains a huge problem for Australian Aborigine communities in Australia. And kava was something that was introduced in the Northern Territories in the 1980s as an alternative to alcohol. And it's such a tragic story because the Aborigines began drinking kava, and there were stories about their quality of life improving and their kind of social cohesion becoming stronger, and people getting gainful employment and things like that. But then Australia went and took it away from them again and banned the import of kava into Australia and condemned Aborigines for consuming it. And that was based on a one study done in 1988 by Menzies School of Health. Is Matthews et al. Are they the ones who did the research that claimed that kava was
Yes,
okay? So
1980.
Matthews et al. Shame on you, Matthews et al.
Yeah,
Because
it
you really screwed things up for a lot of people.
it did, and the really the hard part about it is that he really did report what he saw, but the correlations that people make because of that paper are incorrect.
Yeah.
He reported the health issues with the Aborigines, which were vast and impoverished, forgotten about people, don't typically have great health scores. They're not the healthiest population, and that's what we were seeing in that study. You saw lung volumes decreased. You saw increases of issues with liver, with skin, with heart issues. I mean, all these things, and they tried to connect kava to sudden heart failure, heart attack. They tried to and failed. They were unsuccessful at that. So it actually does not cause heart attack. But what the biggest thing to come out of it was that kava causes liver failure. And what they used to say this was they said that due to the changes in GGT, which is gamma glutamyltransferase, and it is a specific enzyme in your liver, and it rises on heavy kava consumption, especially people with larger BMIs. But if you drink kava, just your bad health, and you that's all you do, you can rise that level. It is not indicative of liver damage. You have to have corresponding AST, ALT increases to say that there's liver damage. It's induction of GGT by adaptation. And it's just called an adaptation. And it's not an unhealthy thing. It's not like it doesn't cause physiological problems. I have friends that drink kava with high GGTs, and their doctors like, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. If any of these other values were off, we would say something, but this is not a big deal. So generally, it is what sparked off the first inklings of liver issue. And it was incorrect. The GGT rise is not an indication of liver damage, and we're not dying out here. Like I'm only on my fourth liver now. I mean, I think that's totally acceptable for 18 years of kava consumption. So, but I mean, really, and I argue with people on a regular basis online on these platforms, and they'll argue with you, but yet here we are, and here is an entire generations of people that continually drink kava on a regular basis. And these issues are not popping up, never have popped up. So it's just like it's hard to argue with people when you're faced with empirical data that says no, that's not true, and people still want to say, well, but I saw it on Google. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is probably the biggest takeaway that people should have from this episode or from this podcast, the early episodes of this podcast. I have spent the whole last 20 years of my life trying to convince people that I am not going to die from liver failure due to my excessive kava consumption, whether it's my parents or my siblings or my friends or people that I work with. I talk about kava a lot because I love kava. I promote kava because I know how wonderful it is for your health, for your lifestyle, for your happiness. But the first thing that people always ask is, "Oh, isn't that the stuff that's bad for your liver?" And whether it's Consumer Reports, which just published an issue that's like dated January 2023, whether it's Consumer Reports making reiterating that claim that kava causes liver damage, it just doesn't go away, and it's based on absolute feet of clay. There's like no evidence that the kava damages your liver. Study after study has shown that it is perfectly safe to consume. If you're going to be worried about anything when it comes to kava, it's where you're getting it from
Yeah.
and whether it has any bacteria or forms or E. coli. Like you want to make sure that you're buying it from a trusted vendor who's making sure that that kind of junk doesn't get into your kava. But it is completely safe. And if people are really concerned about you drinking kava, tell them to just look a little bit deeper because they don't have to look that far to learn the truth about kava.
Right. And even one of Dr. Matthews' own cohorts was talking about this. And out of 20 years of data, there has not been one single case of fulminant hepatic failure in Northern Territory out of their 20 years of consumption. So it's it's not a thing. Now it could have been a thing, and we can talk about that in another episode, but we could do an entire episode on that if you want to. But it could have been a thing. It could have actually been toxic at one point in time. But you would need a time machine to get back to that point.
Right.
But it's
With the wild kava,
yeah, the crazy crap that they came out with in Germany and we're extracting and whatever that was, we don't know. Obviously wasn't good. And it was isolated to very specific areas, and it was very obvious that we had a product issue, a product manufacturing issue, and not a product like an intrinsic product safety issue, because it didn't happen that way. Like kava has been consumed for thousands of years safely, and it continues to be consumed now. Like, and the thing about it is, kava is consumed at a higher clip now than it was then, and we're still not seeing these issues. So
Yeah, so when your uncle is there at Christmas dinner and you say, "Yo, hey, Uncle Jared, I started drinking this stuff kava and it's doing wonders for me." And he says, "Oh, that's the stuff that hurts your liver." Just slap that beer out of his hand and say, "Damn you, Uncle Jared, you're a fool."
yep, get that alcohol out of that hand.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And because there's so much hypocrisy about this topic. You're
Yes,
like you can buy a salad at the supermarket that has Listeria or like it has some kind of
salmonella. Yep,
salmonella and get sick and go to the hospital. That's way more likely to happen to you than ordering a bag of kava online. And actually, it's 100% more likely to happen to you
yeah,
than anything happening to you from kava. So
right.
and this segues nicely into the European Union and the German pharmaceutical ban. So I'll just start off by introducing this topic. The West, Europe, and the United States became interested in kava as a pharmaceutical, well, very early on actually, but we kind of more intensively during the late 20th century, like the 1990s, and people started to take kava in pill form. And in this article, the author, Dr. Pollock, she talks a lot about kava being consumed in pill form in the US. This is kind of before we started making kava with powder, but it was very much seen as like a supplement that would help reduce anxiety, but it probably didn't do much because it was in pill form. And in Germany, it was used for kind of similar purposes. And Jimmy, why don't you take it away on that one because you have a very in-depth
Sure,
understanding of the kava of the kava ban in Germany.
certainly. So the kava industry was made up of exporters from Vanuatu exporting raw powder to processors in Germany, and they were extracting kava and selling it in pills as a pharmaceutical. And this was an accepted practice. They had some really good studies that backed up the efficacy of kava, and this went on for several years until they had a supply issue. There wasn't enough kava to meet the demand of the European Union and Germany. So what they did was they contracted with certain growers in Vanuatu, and went for cultivars that were extremely high in kava lactone content, because that's what you're looking for, right? In kava lactones. So they extracted this kava. We don't know. This is where things get very fuzzy. We don't know if this was an effect from the actual kava itself. There's evidence that says maybe. There's evidence that says no. We don't know if it was truly something from the wrong plant part theory. They've gone back and found legacy samples and tested those and did not find traces of chlorophyll or pipermethystine, which would indicate above ground portions being used. So they used this extract, and it went on the market about 1998. And we at that time we started seeing the first slew of adverse event reports come in from Germany and Switzerland. Actually, specifically Switzerland was the first. Lytan was the product that was marketed in Switzerland. It was an acetonic extract of kava, and they had somewhere around 30-40 cases of acute liver failure or liver complications in individuals that were taking these manufactured drugs out of Germany. And so BfArM, which is the German pharmaceutical board, threw the red flag up and pulled the market authorization for kava. This was for basically, this is where the terms get convoluted as well, because here we're talking about kava extract, and kava extract is a world away from a kava and what we drink in kava. It'd be like calling kava. I believe Vincent LeBeau makes the same analogy, but it would be similar to calling a caffeine pill coffee, like taking 10 caffeine pills and be like, damn, coffee sucks, it made me sick. So it's not the same, and that's where it gets messed up. They ascribe this warning and this issue to kava itself and not the preparation. And as such, kava overall and the European Union, everyone followed Germany's lead. Every country, even countries that France had great kava products, great efficacy. People were getting relief. They pulled all their kava products. Not one single case of liver problems in the entire country, and they still pulled it off the shelf. Just along with it, other countries, UK did the same thing. They saw what Germany did, pulled it off the shelf. No issues there. There were several countries, such as the United States, that did not ban kava. Thank goodness. And we have some people to thank for that. But it got pulled into a realm of bureaucracy, and so it was pulled off the shelf. And after that, the FDA issued a product advisory, a consumer product advisory. But Germany banned kava, and that was in 2002 is when all that went down. And by that point, we had about 100 case reports with tons of duplicates, very little information. And it was such a terrible spattering of adverse event reports. They were able to narrow it down to ones they could actually use to 3. And 3 of those, they narrowed that down to one person, and they believe it was a idiosyncratic reaction of an immunologic type, which would be an allergic reaction, basically. Something that is extremely, extremely rare and happens to like maybe 1 out of several hundred million people. Not a very common thing at all. And so we're not the scope of the problem. There were from 1990 to 1998, there were about 400 million kava pills produced and consumed, but yet they had only 40 or 50 of these actual cases that came down the line. And it's just like, guys, you need to understand, we need to keep this problem actually in perspective. This is safer than most other drugs on the market in terms of, if this were the real, if kava were actually causing these problems, it still wouldn't be necessarily a problem in the pharmaceutical realm. But of course, this doesn't apply at all to kava that we get from where we get it in powder and we make our kava traditionally. This applies zero, not a bit. It doesn't even slightly apply. And that's where the confusion comes in, where people will see, oh, well, kava's banned. Well, no, that wasn't kava that was banned. It was the kava extracts that were banned. And it's not the same thing. I know people were like, well, it's the same chemical. No, but we don't know. We don't know if it was actually kava during that time frame, something that was done to the kava during that time frame, or a poor quality source sending out of wherever it was coming from during that time frame. So we truly don't know. We just don't know. But it set kava back to it completely set kava back to the very beginning. We had people with kava gardens that were they just couldn't sell. I mean, it dropped the price down to nothing. It really did a number on the kava industry. It just destroyed it.
But so this ties really nicely back into the thesis of Nancy Pollock's paper, which is about the sustainability of kava and how the kava liver scare really was a huge threat, continues to be a huge threat to kava farmers, to kava processors and vendors and sellers, because they have to deal with this harmful kind of rumor or reputation that kava has been given by people that are uninformed. And the part about the German story that gets me every time I read a summary of it, it just kind of makes me just throw up my hands and say humanity's hopeless, is is the fact that, like, within 2 or 3 years of that ban happening, maybe even shorter than that, they basically came out and said, "Oh, you know what? Actually, that research is completely unfounded, and kava is safe." And
Yep.
yet, it's still
It's still there.
stuck. It's
Yep.
still stuck.
Yep. Yeah, the World
Like,
Health Organization came out and said it was safe in
I mean,
2007.
right? I mean, imagine like that happening with. I mean, it's just insane to me. I mean, there are so many things that people can be allergic to.
Yeah.
There are so many negative reactions people can have to so many different kinds of medications,
Food.
natural or chemical, and yet kava is the one thing that, like, maybe had something to do with somebody at some point getting sick, and yet and yet it still it has to carry this cross. It's just awful.
Yep. Yes, indeed. And you
Um,
know what's funny is I actually wrote up a little essay on this, and it's
yeah.
strangely coming true. I'm starting to see warnings now that green tea extract actually has a higher rate of liver failure and liver problems than anything kava has ever seen in its entire duration of existence. I mean, I'm talking like 200 confirmed cases of liver failure from green tea extracts. So now we're actually starting to see rolling out warnings, liver warnings for green tea extracts. So, but
Wow.
and that's where they belong. Kava does not there is no intrinsic property of kava that has been proven to cause liver dysfunction ever. It is, I mean, they have flavokavein B. Okay, maybe flavokavein B. Let's give it flavokavein B to things in massive amounts. They found it actually was hepatoprotective. So it's like, and also a good cancer, like a possible chemotherapy drug. But it's, we don't know. We don't know. We think that, honestly, I think this is my personal opinion and it means nothing. So don't take this with an entire grain or mountain or salt mine. But I believe it comes down to the unethical actions of just a few from what happened. And I believe we're all suffering from someone or some company wanting to have more money and have more product.
Sure.
And it just came down to where we pay the price for it forever.
Yeah, and when you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you've finished dressing down Uncle Jared, Aunt Doreen when she's drinking her green tea, put that tea down. That's
Get the
gonna
tea
kill
down.
your liver, Aunt Doreen. That's
Haven't you heard?
not talking about my kava. You and your
Real
green
poison
tea,
right there.
you heathen.
And I guess
So-
that kind of that drives us to our next question.
Yeah, which and I wanted to make sure that we connect this question well to Nancy Pollock's thesis, which is about the endangerment of the kava trade and the sustainability of kava. So
So-
yes, go ahead, pose the question.
Is kava a drug? Is it a drug?
Kava is a psychoactive beverage.
It is and according to Ed Johnston, it is a relaxing, nutritious beverage. That's what he said.
I love it. That's like, I mean, that description, it makes me like feel relaxed just hearing that, a traditional calming beverage.
Yep.
I love that.
Mhm.
That's beautiful.
But
So Nancy, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, my stance on this is that kava is not a drug because the FDA will not allow us to call it that. In fact, if we
Yes.
even allude to it being a drug, we have to put all sorts of warnings and labels on our products about how this was not intended to be used to cure, treat, or prevent any disease. So, in essence, we are not allowed to call it a drug. Now, let's get this out of the way right now. In terms of scientific nomenclature and semantics, kava lactones exert physiological effects. And if you drink them and you feel them, you know that. That by definition makes a kava lactones a drug. However, I say socially we shouldn't refer to it as such because it is a beverage. It is a food. It's just like I think it's probably more an apt analogy would be like the French and wine. It's a food. It's a food. And it's like that for us. It is a food, but it also has a unique component.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that if you start going down this road and you start thinking about things that have a psychoactive or physiological effect on your body, kind of easy to identify ones are coffee and tea and yerba mate. Things that have caffeine in them. Chocolate has
Right.
caffeine in it. Obviously, alcohol has a huge psychoactive effect, which is more of a disease than it is an actual like effect. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to call kava a drug, you have to also call coffee a drug. And really the word itself and the reasons why we can't use the word, it's purely kind of a political
Yeah.
economic thing. It's not whether the word is appropriate or not in a
Right.
scientific sense. It's
Yep.
completely discursive, meaning that it's part of the way that we're allowed to talk about things and what the government will kind of come after us for and what they won't come after us for. So
Yeah.
it's just safer to call it a traditional relaxing beverage. And yeah, I mean, it to me, like when I talk about it and I talk to my friends about it, and my friends are pounding shots of tequila, I'm like, kava is the anti-drug.
It
It's
truly is.
I know dozens of people, and if you go to a kava bar in the United States, and whether it's in California or Florida or North Carolina, you are going to meet recovering drug addicts who drink kava and have it has saved their lives.
Mm,
And so for it to be confused with substance abuse and drugs is actually really offensive.
it is. It's very
Yeah.
offensive.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. And I mean, it can be argued. There are a lot of people that would argue about whether it's a semantically a drug or not. But the truth is, yes. In terms of if you were to ask a doctor, is this a drug? He would say, yes, absolutely. But in terms of how we should, like you were saying, how we should speak about it with each other, it's not. It is a beverage, and it is. I mean, yeah, it can be psychologically altering, but it isn't. I mean, in terms of drugs that like change the way you feel, kava is not on the top of that list. I mean, like truly, like I
Oh,
love it, and I love it for its subtlety, but it's not something that's going to like I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go rob my neighbor because I'm running out of kava, and I'm not gonna spend my last $5 on kava when I have to buy groceries or something. So it's not a drug in that sense. But
you
I
speak
mean,
for yourself, man.
I'll back of the
Exactly.
7-Eleven mixing up. Gotta tie off, man. Come on. But
Yeah, and I think on and that same line, and I think that this is an important point here, is that when you look at caffeine and you look at alcohol and you look at illegal street drugs, you're looking at things that are highly addictive.
yes,
Like I cannot function without caffeine in the morning, or I usually drink yerba mate, but I like can't start working until I've had my yerba mate or my coffee. Like I need that caffeine. I can I can travel to another country where I don't feel safe bringing my kava with me, and I will be 100% perfectly fine. I have no withdrawals. I miss it. I miss having my kava, but just like I miss having my PlayStation. It's like
right.
I wish I had my kava with me, but I don't. This
Yep.
sucks. But I don't shake. I don't sweat. I don't feel
Right.
any withdrawal symptoms because there are none, and it's not
Hmm.
addictive.
Yep. I've been drinking it for, well, I'd say this last stint was about 4 solid daily years, because I went to the hospital and I didn't have back in 20 no, 2 solid daily years, and that was only a break of a week there when I was in the hospital in 2020. But I've yet to have any sort of rebound effects or anything. I took a break actually while I was in Hawaii. I didn't drink kava for a few days, and
Oh,
it was just like, okay, I wasn't a big deal. So I mean, it's I've I don't like being a gatekeeper when it comes to addiction, because I mean, people be addicted to eating toilet paper. I mean, it can be anything. But in terms of kava being physically addictive or tolerance causing, it does not. I've used 40 grams of kava for almost 20 years, and I don't have to use any more. I don't have to make a bigger dose because my last dose last night didn't work as well. Like it doesn't do that. Like it's not an intrinsic property of kava that way. And I actually have been fighting people on Reddit recently because of this exact question. However, these people on Reddit will not tell you that they're on a laundry list of drugs and or botanical substances that could easily be
Yep.
interacting with the kava pharmacodynamically and causing some sort of weird effect that reduces some effect of kava that they like. And we're not we're not doctors. Well, some of us aren't doctors, but we're not pharmacologists on this chat. I mean, I like to think that I know a little bit about some of the things that go on, but it's not. I don't have any. I don't have the numbers or letters at the end of my name, so I can't
Yeah.
say that I'm that. But it's difficult for us to truly pin down what's going on with those sort of things, and that's why kava is kava. We want to talk about kava. We want it to be 100% kava all the time. We don't have time for other stuff. It's just, yeah, it's and then that kind of goes back to the our topic we were just on is the drug. I mean, when we start to allow kava to be associated with other things that have reputations as being drugs, you drag it along with it, and kava is always in that danger.
I was just gonna say to tie it all up, I
Yeah.
think to summarize, Nancy Pollock's kind of main thrust here is kava is a very, very important cultural plant for all of these different cultures, including our own, including people like you and me.
Right.
And there are the threats that are posed to kava by the negative kind of false information about its safety and then its connection to drug use. Those are threats to the sustainability of kava in its many a myriad forms, whether that's Fijian culture or Vanuatu culture or American kava culture, which we have our own different cultures within our American kava culture. We have our
Right.
kava bars in Florida. We have our people that get on Zoom calls and drink kava and talk about kava. She's advocating for the right tone to discuss kava as a safe, relaxing traditional beverage that is healthy, that causes no harm, and is a great benefit to farmers in the South Pacific, and should be carefully dealt with and not just grouped with horrible
Drugs.
things like kratom.
Hmm.
And she doesn't mention kratom in the article, but it's one thing that kept jumping into my mind is the biggest threat to cop in the United States is kratom. And she really it's a really nice article. I'm glad that we read this as our first one. It covered so many different topics. Yeah, this was great, Jimmy.
Agreed. Glad we could talk about this one, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the Kava Lounge. This is our introductory episode, our debut. We will be talking about a lot of different topics over the coming years. And thanks for listening. This will only get better as it goes on because we'll get into a better flow.
Yep.
But if you've made it this far, Bula, and thank you so much.
Ula Malok. Have a good one.